So welcome to this afternoon session on Brewing the Best of All Worlds, or as I like to call it, Spring Cloud in the Cloud for frictionless Kubernetes-based microservices, because I like short titles. I am a Spring developer, so I like very short method names too. But my name is Mark Heckler. My name is Mark Heckler. I'm a principal cloud advocate of Java and JVM languages with Microsoft. I actually came from the Spring team, so I have a lot of love there, and that's why I wanted to start on time, because I don't want to run late for Mark Fisher, because he'll just pound me into submission later, and that's bad. Please do stick around. If we have to take it out in the hall afterward, we will. But I have a couple things to give out. A copy of my book, and a set of Microsoft Surface earbuds. And I'm doing this based on like most attentive, most engaged, and which is really cruel, right? Because we're right after lunch. That's when everybody is the most attentive and energized in the whole day. But here we are. So, all right. If you need to reach me, if you think of something after the fact, please hold questions to the end, because again, this is packed. This is a packed session in terms of content. So if you have anything afterward, please do catch me in the hallway. If you think of it 10 minutes after you walk off, that happens to me too, that's fine. Ping me on Twitter. That's the best way to reach me. I live on Twitter. But if you must use email, some people tell me it's going to be big someday. My email coordinates are there as well. So very quickly, because I want to get into the code fast. Who am I? I am an architect and developer. By background, I am an advocate, obviously. We just already covered that. I have co-authored a couple of books, contributed content and code to several others, wrote one by myself, even after swearing I would never do that. I did, so oh well. I am a Java champion, Java 1 Rockstar, Groundbreaker Ambassador, Kotlin Developer Expert, a few other honors and awards, which still mean that I have to go get my own coffee. I don't know who I see about that, but here we are. I'm also a licensed pilot, instrument-rated pilot. So we're going to be doing some aviation examples here today, because I'm a geek, I'm a nerd, and in multiple domains, as probably you all are too. And that's my other domain. So we'll use that. That's the latest book. If you want to know more about it, go to bit.ly, Spring Boot Book, or just follow the book on Twitter, because even the book's on Twitter. So today, the plan for today is, and I love quotes, good quotes, that's another one of my geeky domains. This is by Leonard Bernstein, former conductor of the New York Philharmonic Orchestra and also a composer. He said, to achieve great things, two things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. We have those, so let's go. So a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about, and this is kind of that highest level, 10,000 foot view down. So we're going to talk about configuration and externalizing this. If you're familiar with like the 12 factors and 17 factors and 57 and a half factors, these are all good principles to follow. They're not talked about much anymore, because hopefully we kind of internalize them into ourselves by now. But this is kind of the crux of some of the key bits of it. So first, configuration, because you don't want to hard code stuff into your apps, especially when you have multiple instances of each app, of each service. So you externalize that configuration. This is a good practice. I hate to call them best practices, but it's a very, 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 very good practice. We have service discovery, because when you have a dynamic configuration with several different instances of several different microservices, maybe spanning regions and zones, you need to have them able to find each other. That's your service discovery mechanism. You have backing services, which provide really the meat, the data, the value for your entire distributed system. Then you have consuming services, which actually take that, manipulate it, pass it on, use it in some way, which also provide value, right? And then you have a gateway service, typically, because when you have this massive portfolio of applications, this massive portfolio of microservices, you don't want a million ports of entry to come in and access that from the outside world. So you have a gateway service, which typically handles things like security and routing and load balancing and things like that. I kind of already mentioned the load balancing, but also baked in are things like circuit breakers and flows and again, securing your entire domain, your applications. And then, of course, once you've done all that, you start realizing there's a lot of work involved in just building out the infrastructure and the supporting platform around this. So wouldn't it be cool if you had a platform to do some of that heavy lifting for you? And this is something I'll mention again at the end, but Microsoft and VMware have partnered to provide Azure Spring Cloud. So it takes all the best parts of Spring Cloud and puts them into Azure. And as developers, I like to say we embrace complexity many times unintentionally. We do it out of necessity, right? Because we're so close to the finish line, we're so close to deploying functionality for our end users, and we can't push it across because of this rule or this the systems engineer or whatever. I hate to point fingers, but a lot of times we just say, give us the power and we'll do it ourselves. And that works, right? But then the next time you have a maintenance release, the next time you have to create another application, another service, deploy another service, you're doing all those same things again yourself, which means you're doing a lot of extraneous work which adds zero value to your customers, to your end users, to your community, to your people. So it's really nice when you can divest that and have the platform work for you, and that's what Azure Spring Cloud does. I'm not going to hit that too hard. I just want to show you the power of that. As a developer, I love it because you can still tweak what you want to, but you don't have to in most cases. So let's code. That took us 5 minutes. That's way too much. So let's get into the good stuff. All right. So again, I'd rather stand and code. So if I nod off, if you just tap me and wake me up again, you know, because I don't like to sit and code. I feel like coding should be like an active sport, but here we are. All right. So can everyone see that? All right. So we'll start here. This is the Spring Initializer, right? Oh, good. Okay, it is there. I'm going to just spin up a couple of things that provide the structure, the framework that we're going to build around for our portfolio of microservices. I'm going to keep this very simple, and I'll narrate as I go in terms of like filling in the background and details. If I miss anything, if I give something kind of short shrift, and you feel like I should have maybe talked about it more, maybe I wanted to and just couldn't, ping me in the hallway. I love to talk, I love to code, and we'll talk it out. So I'm going to use Java and Maven for all of this stuff today, but of course you have options with Kotlin, Groovy, Gradle, etc., and so on and so forth. Use the current version of Spring Boot. I'm going to change this to, instead of example.com, which is very nice, but I like the hecklers.com a little bit better. I'm going to make this a little smaller maybe, if I can. Yeah, that fits a little better. And then I'm going to just start by creating a config service. And the config service serves up values, properties, if you will, and even secured properties for your different microservices and instances of in your distributed system. So I'm just going to keep this, and we'll call this, cleverly enough, config service for our description. I'm going to use jar packaging because, after all, it is the 21st century. And I'm going to use Java 17, and I'm going to add a dependency in this case. So config server, and let's see, there we go. And again, I'm going to streamline this as much as I can because time is so precious. And we're just going to make the most of it today. And good Wi-Fi is good, so that's good. And did that already unzipped? Wow, that was fast. Even outpaced me. It's good. I have coffee and water. Coffee to give me fuel, and then the water when my voice starts to get raspy. So we'll got to have that two-fisted drinker here. All right, so for starters, I'm going to just assign a server port since I'm going to be running this locally. We're going to make this 8888, and then I want to establish my Spring Cloud config server get URI because the config service can actually pull from multiple different backends to provide those those values, right? Those secrets, if you will, the properties that you might consume in your application. The easiest way, well, let me finish this and we'll just take a quick diversion here. Let's see. So I want to go to github.com/mkheck, which is my site, if you will, and then mh-aasc-get -config.get. There we go. All right, and then I'm going to go to the app, and actually I'll show you this here in a minute. I'm going to enable config server, and I actually am doing some encryption and decryption, so I don't want to run this from my IDE. What I'm going to do is go out here. And let's go to desktop, config service. What's that? Oh, I did. 2 colons, 1 slash. Good catch. Boy, your eyes are better than mine. Which isn't saying much. I mean, look at these glasses. But anyway. All right, so Maven, clean, package. Okay, while that's running, I want to pop over and just show you kind of what is being served up. Because when you're talking about properties, many times we actually embed those, and it's an anti-pattern, right? But we embed those in our applications. But when you have, let's say, a single service, and you have 10 instances of that, and you need to change something, you're going to have to bring those down, restart. If you externalize that configuration, if you externalize those properties, it's just a simple matter of refreshing, right? So here are some things that I have in the config service. We'll use this as the foundation. Again, you can always use Vault and things like that as well. But this works really well because as developers, we're familiar with Git. We're familiar and we need auditing and tracing and we have all of those things with simple text files that provide those properties for us. So we have the application.yaml, which provides properties for all applications that use the config service. And then you may have one specific to an API gateway service or an airport service in my case. Oops, I tapped the mic. Condition service, discovery service, and all these things offer different options that your applications can consume and use. I also have a couple of encrypted values here, and again, this is going to be about aviation because that's my second love, being a pilot as well, for those of you who came in late. So I have a couple of a token and a value that I've encrypted, and then we can decrypt these using JCE with the built-in capabilities of the Spring Cloud config server. I also will show you another way here later on, which is kind of nice baked into the platform, which handles it for you as well. But this is a good start, right? So I'm going to get this started, java-jar target config, and we'll run this because I actually have a key in the environment that I can use to go ahead and provide those values. So what happens? What are you looking at? So I'm going to pull this up really quick, localhost. Typing. And let's go to the application default. So this is the profile that I'm going to be pulling up from the config service. I'll bring this up, and we can see that here's the profile that we're using, and here are the various values that we're pulling in, just served up by the config service. I'm also going to just very quickly, nobody peek, right? So I'm going to pull up the local profile. Oh, that was a mess, my types caps lock. So let me fix that. Cal. Yeah, so we can see a little bit more coming through here for local, and we can see that we have a couple of decrypted values now. The best plane, of course, is the Warrior. That's why I like to fly. And we've got a token value here that we've decrypted. So anyway, that gets us kind of a very quick tour of the config service. We'll take it from there, and let's go see what mischief we can create next. So I'm going to go back to my Spring Initializer, and the next thing that I want to provide is another key bit of infrastructure, which is our discovery service. So I'm going to just change this to discovery service, and we'll change the description, once again, discovery, and then we'll change some of the dependencies, or our dependency. We don't need this to be a config server because, again, we've got a config server for that, but what we will want it to do is to be able to pull in its values from, its properties from the config service. So I want to make this a config client. I also want to make this a discovery server, and then, oops, well, actually that's good. We'll just stop there. And I'm going to generate the application. And again, I apologize in advance for the pacing. I've got so much stuff I want to share with you today that we're going to be rolling through it pretty quickly. Save questions to the end, unless you catch a typo, please. and then we'll launch in and cover it if we need to, even out in the hall. I just don't want to impact Mark's talk after mine. Hey, Spencer. All right, so let's go ahead and open our application.properties. And what I want to do now, a couple of things. I want to define this as our discovery service, right? So that way it identifies itself to the config service as a discovery service. Give me the properties for a discovery service. And then I also want to define, oops, not the profiles. I want to define the config import to point to, again, this is a config server, and we're going to point to http://localhost because I'm running this, at least so far, locally, and that will give us what we need there. And then I want to annotate this as a Eureka server, and we'll run that, and then I'll show you what it looks like from the dashboard for that discovery service, because it's kind of helpful to know what's in your distributed system, right? And this gives you that. So let's go ahead and open this, localhost 8761, and voila. All right, let me back that up so we can see that a little better. At this point, it shows just some key metrics for the discovery service itself, but the key bit is right here because it shows what instances of applications are registered with Eureka, with the discovery service. And right now, none are, so let's go fix that. That's the next step. So we'll go next, and we'll start building out our domain, right? Because we have some infrastructure bits in place now. Let's fill out the domain. I'm going to, again, use Maven and Java, current version of boot, com.the Hecklers, that's cool. And I'm going to next create an airport service. What the goal is to consume a couple of external APIs and then use the discovery service to tie it all together, which is really, really powerful. And I just hope we have time. All right, so I'm going to change this to airport service. If not, we'll cheat, but I don't like to cheat. Cheating's bad, right? Same thing, I'm going to remove the Eureka server, and I want to add the Eureka Discovery client, right? And then, let's see, what do I want to do? I want to make Spring, let's see, web reactive. I want to bring in Spring reactive web so we get web flux. And let's see, what else do we want? I want actuator for the production ready reporting and capabilities. Let's see, I want Lombok, and I want reactive Mongo, because what I want to do is save some information. And let's see, that gets us, I think that gets us everything we need. If not, we'll go back and add in later. So I will create the service project and go here, and we'll open that, unzip that, and open that. And let's build out our first domain, right? Our first domain application. So let's go first to our application properties. Once again, we'll define the application name as airport service, because that allows us then to go via the config service. It will bring up the specific information related to airport services, right? And I'm already getting raspy, so much better. I also want to define the config import here, config server at http://localhost again. And there are different ways you can do this. I actually like config first. We can talk about that later versus discovery first. But this is just one way of doing it. It's my preference. I have reasons for that. And again, if you're curious, we can talk later. And then I want to define the profile, the active profile, so I can use that decryption key, right, and get those values back out. I need that for my token for my external API. So I'm going to now go to the application, and we'll start building out our domain. So I'm going to make this pretty quick. I'm going to use Lombok for most of this, but not all of it, because it's good to mix things up. I'm going to have it provide, Lombok provide a no-args constructor and all-args constructor. I want to ignore unknown properties, right? Because if we don't know what they are, we still want to have it continue to work with that, that external API. I also want to make this a document so that way it can be stored in Mongo. And we'll call this class, cleverly enough, airport, right? Now, I'm going to define the ID field as the ICAO. So private string ICAO, and then we have some other fields that we'll want to keep track of. So string, let's see, so the airport city, state, and the airport name, and then I want the elevation in feet. This is just the API that I'm consuming, so it's a little ugly, but it works, right? And then we also will have something like our, let's see, so we have double, because we want to have latitude and longitude, right? So that will tell us where the airport is. And that is good enough for today. I actually have a more complete example in the repo, but this gets us going, right? I'm also going to define an interface here, which is our airport repository interface, right? Repository, and we're going to create that by extending the reactive CRUD repository interface defined in Spring Data. And that allows us, simply by defining this interface and extending this interface, Spring Boot's autoconfig will create a proxy bean for us to interface with that, to store, to retrieve objects of type airport with the ID of type, again, string, if I can type. There we go, all right. So now I want to create a service. I'm going to create an airport service here, and that will allow us to interact with the various different airports as far as the externally and internally to save these down. So I'm going to create a couple of things here. I'm going to, oops, that's not what I want there. Value, and I want to point to, once again, in this case, our avwx.token. And if it's not there, I want the value to be reported as no valid token, right? And I'm going to assign that to a field called, or a variable called token. I also want to have a web client here, so I can use this to access our external API. We'll call this, again, cleverly enough, client equals web client.create. And I'm going to point this to https://avwx. It's just an external service, which is really kind of useful and fun. API station, because I want to be retrieving stations, in this case, airport information. And then I also want to use our airport repository. We'll just call that repo. I'm going to make this a non-null value. And then I want to have this as required args constructor. So Lombok will create a constructor with only the properties or values that I provided as or specified as non-null or required values. Okay, so I'm going to Now, let's see, what do I want to do? I want to define some endpoints, right? So I want to retrieve a flux of airports, and a flux, if you're not familiar with reactive programming and reactive streams, fluxes and monos are reactor speak for publishers. So you don't have to wait and collect all values before you send back a response. You provide them as they go. That's like the 10-second summary of it, which is not a full summary, but again, talk to me in the hallway. We'll talk it out if you're curious. So think of it more like a reactive type of iterable, and only instead of collecting all values, and sometimes the values continue forever, you don't have to wait. You just start feeding them back. So a flux is 0 to n, a mono is 0 to 1. So it roughly corresponds to an iterable, or returning an object of type t, right? So we're going to return a reactive iterable, if you will, a flux of airports. So get all airports, and we're going to just do, we're going to query our repo and do a find all. And then we also know that we'll probably want to be able to return a single airport, right? So mono airport, we'll call this get airport by ID, and we'll specify, of course, a string ID to retrieve. Return repo dot find by ID, cleverly enough. And then I'm actually going to, oh yes, come on IntelliJ. You can do it. Yes, okay. I'm also going to mix things a little bit in this. It's probably not the best approach, but again, time is precious, so we're just going to do it anyway. I'm going to create a method which will return a mono of type airport. And in this case, I'm actually going to query that external API to return the airport in question. So this will be a retrieve airport by ID, and this will be a string ID. And in this case, what I want to do is use the client, the reactive client that I've defined above, and I will do a get, and I'm going to point to a URI. In this case, I want to, let's see, what do I want to do? So I want to, I've got the station, and then I want to add, let's try this, because things never go wrong when you're doing it live. We've got an ID, and I want to add the question token equals, and then the token, and then I want to pass in the ID and the token, right? And then I want to retrieve that. I want to convert that body to, in this case, a mono, a single value, 0 or 1, zero if it doesn't find it, obviously, but 1 if it does, of type airport. And then I'm going to log that, just because I like to see what's happening. So that's our service. It should do yeoman's work for us, so we're going to continue. We're going to create our REST controller so we can use that to create the external-facing API for this application. This is our airport controller, and let's see, so we want to inject our airport service, right? And once again, in this case, at all constructor, because we can just inject everything. And we're going to define a few endpoints. So in this case, we're going to return a flux of airports. This is pretty simple, right? All airports. And we'll just return service dot get all airports. And see, I do apply some rigor, even in a tight time frame here. And then I'm going to also point to where we can retrieve an airport by its ID/ID, and then public mono of airport. And let's see, airport by ID. In this case, this is a path variable, so we will allow this to be passed as a string, of course. Return service dot get airport by ID, pass ID, and voila. Now we need some data. So I'm going to prime the pump, if you will. I'm just going to create a bean here, and this will be our web client. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just create a command line runner. We'll call this load data, and I'm going to inject our airport service. We'll just call it SVC for short. Airport repository repo, and let's go to town. So a command line runner. We pass in any arguments. We return. This is just a lambda that we're specifying here. And here we go. So I'm going to, for starters, I'm going to take the repo and I'm going to delete anything that I've left out there to make sure we have a clean slate to start the application. And then I'm going to chain a method here which takes a publisher, a flux in this case, of values coming in. And I'm going to provide those values just with flux.just. And this is the one time I'm using a live template. Okay, so I said no copy pasta. I'm not. This is a live template, but it's literally just for string values, and because that's painful to watch me try to type in string values. But here are a bunch of airports, class Bravo, Delta, Charlie, and Delta airports within a certain number of miles of St. Louis. I'm from St. Louis. You can do this anywhere, but I just kind of looked at any towered airport within a certain number of miles, and which now escape me, maybe 50 miles, from St. Louis proper, STL, St. Louis Lambert. And I'm creating a flux of just those ICAO codes, the International Civil Aviation Organization ID codes. And I'm going to take that flux of those values, and then I'm going to map each of those strings, right, to my service. I shortened it. That was helpful. And then I'm going to retrieve the airport by its ID, and then I'm going to flat map that. I'm going to take the airport, and I'm just going to do a repo save all, right? And then I'm going to subscribe, because this is a publisher. At the end of the string of operations or string of services that are interacting, somebody needs to subscribe to that publisher. It's just like a magazine, right? Until you subscribe, nothing happens, and that's very important. I mean, there are hot publishers too, but generally speaking, a publisher is a cold publisher. The reason that's important is because you don't want your publishers doing a lot of work, burning a lot of resources, if no one's listening. So you want to wait until you get that command to subscribe, and that's exactly what we're doing. So let's go ahead and restart this, or start this, and we'll see what we have, see if I've missed anything. And I'll take a drink so I can keep talking. How are we doing on time? That's the key bit. Good, we're doing well. So we see that we've got some stuff here. So more importantly, let's go out here and look at our discovery service. And of course, it's telling me that, hey, the refresh cycle, and I've only got one instance, so it's not, resilient, and that's fine. For a demo, that's fine. But here's the key bit, right? Remember when I said that this was the important part where you saw all the applications and the different, in this case, we see there's literally one availability zone. We have one instance of it, and it is up. So let's go check it out. And there's nothing showing under actuator because I haven't put any status health information there. But let's just go here and pull back a list of airports. We see that we have a good number of airports, the elevation, the latitude, longitude. So we've got Parks, Cahokia, St. Louis Downtown, Jeff City, Decatur, so on and so forth. So we have all these airports that we're pulling back from an external API. We've used an encrypted token that we're decrypting on the fly to get that using config service. And that's incredibly powerful for not really a lot of work. We've just done a few minutes, right? Just whipped it up. So let's go ahead and let's whip up something else. Let's push our luck. It's always fun to push your luck. So I'm going to next create a weather service, because if you're a pilot, weather is very important. If you're a passenger, weather is very important. I noticed the last few days in Atlanta, the weather's been a little iffy, right? So it was fun. I flew down commercial. I critiqued the pilot's landing. That's always fun when you get to pick on someone else. But let's face it, you've got winds gusting into the 20-knot range, and that's not much fun to land in, so yeah, it's not terrible. But weather is an important factor, so we're going to pull up the weather service. We're going to create a weather service, and again, use that external API to access that live real-time weather. I don't need to store anything in Mongo because I'm going to be pulling this back live. The value is always live, whereas an airport's probably going to be there a while. Weather changes like that. So we're going to go with that. We'll generate this, and once again, we'll go here, we'll open this up, weather, unzip, and we'll open it up in our IDE, and we'll get to work again to build out another piece of our portfolio of microservices. Oh yes, okay, so, nope. There we go, app. So we go to our application properties, which is where we keep our sensible defaults for applications, and that allow us to, in turn, point to that configuration service to get the full details, right? The properties that we want to externalize. So in this case, our Spring application name is our weather service, right? And then our, our config import is, once again, config server, http://localhost 8888, and then Spring profiles active once again as local, because we're going to be decrypting and using that token again to get to that external API. So once again, let's define our domain first. And in this case, this is weather, right? So I'm going to start off similarly, but then take a kind of a quick detour. So I'm going to make this a data class. Lombok's going to provide me my getter setters equals hashcode and toString. I want Lombok to provide a no-args constructor, an all-args constructor. I want it to ignore properties when we unmarshal that are unknown, so we can continue to use an API that may be evolving. The public API may change on us, and that's fine too. I'm going to create a class called METAR. What is METAR, you may ask? Meteorological Aerodrome Report. It's a fancy name for current weather. Aviation is like IT. It loves fancy names. And then you have TAFs, the Terminal Aerodrome Report. Very fancy, it just means forecasts. So we're not gonna get into the TAFs today. We're gonna keep, again, things pretty simple. So I wanna make, let's see, for our METAR, I wanna have our ICAO code for our ID, right? And then I also want to have, let's see. Oh, I want a time because I want the time that it's active. So I'll come back to that here in a minute. Time. And then I also want the flight rules. And again, I'm using the external API, and I'm not going to create troubles to redefine anything. So that's why it's a little ugly. Norix instructor, Norix instructor, and then once again, JSON ignore properties, ignore unknown true class, and this will be our time class. And then let's see. So we have a zoned date time that we want to use. We'll just call this cleverly enough DT. And then we also want to the representation. And this is another thing. When it comes to aviation, things go back several years, and bandwidth was very, very precious in the early days. Still kind of is, right? Because you're squirting data back and forth between planes and ground and satellites and everything else. So you want it tight. So it's this cryptic string of characters that gives you everything you need to know. You just have to decode it. You're the computer. So that's what we're going to be doing here. This is our domain. And I'm going to, again, keep things pretty tight here. So I want to make this a REST controller. We'll call this our weather controller. And let's see, what do we want to define here? Well, the first, once again, we need our token. So I'm going to have an at value. And then, let's see here. So dollar and avwx.token. And once again, if we can't find a token, we want to just indicate no valid token, private string token, and then we want to have our web client, and we're going to make that web client.create, and once again, we're going to point to ES. Almost did it again. He's smiling. He's like, I was this close. All right, so avwx.rest/API, and we'll stop there because we're going to take this in a little different direction. And then that's probably good. Yeah, that's good. So let's define our endpoints. In this case, we want to point to a METAR / and define and pull back the METAR for a particular, say that 3 times fast, airport by its ID, right? So private, no, actually, this would be a public flux, no, public mono of METAR. I need to stop and think for a second. And this will be get METAR. And let's see, we're passing it, we're using by ID. So I like to put this in here. You don't have to, right? But I want this string ID. And then what we want to do now is return client.get, and we'll actually pass the URI. And in this case, let's see, so we want the ID, right? Question for our parameter, token equals, and token. And then we want to pass in our ID and our token, right? We'll retrieve that, and then we'll convert that body to a mono, once again, in this case, of type METAR, and then I'm just going to log it so we can see what's happening as it happens. Now, I also want to, just for grins, because I like to have something at the root, right? So I'm going to just do a default here, and public mono. Need to slow down because typing's going to the toilet here. And we'll say get default METAR, and we'll just return get METAR by ID, and we'll pass in KSTL, just as a, because we're basing everything around St. Louis. We can easily do it for Atlanta or anywhere else, but this works. So let's try that and see if I've forgotten anything. See if everybody let me down and didn't catch when I messed something up. In fairness, I do have the front row seat, so. Everybody was smart enough not to sit up front. I usually pick on anyone who's sitting up front and saying, okay, if I miss something, it's on you, because you could see this better, right? But everybody outdid me this time, so. Yes. All it does is just let you peek, right? So, yes, yeah. So here we now have our airport service and our weather service. Let's go ahead and pull up our weather service. And once again, it's just showing us, hey, for the actuator, you know, I didn't put any kind of health endpoint, so it's not showing us anything. Oh, Okay, so I obviously did something wrong. What have I missed? This is how you know it's live. So I've got the token here. Let's see. What did I do? Why does this not show? Oh, yes, that's important. I have to put metar slash. Yeah, that's important. Let's do that. Oh, you know what? No, this looks good. We'll try this. If it doesn't work, we'll always think it should have. All right, so let me close this. We'll go back. We'll refresh Eureka here really quickly. Pull that up. Look at that. Oh, null. Okay, so I've got something off here. ICAO. Okay, well, let's just brain cramping. ICAO. Don't have time for this. I want to make sure I get everything in here. ICAO. And actually, that should have still passed in just fine. All right. That's, I'm just trying to spot the hiccup. Oh, yeah, that still looks right to me. So let's go back because I want to make sure that I have everything working before I go any further. Let's actually do this. Let's do metar slash and we'll do KATL. And it's still coming back null. Yeah, that just allows us to use a security token to pull it back. Well, that's fascinating. No, the token is, or we wouldn't be getting back the other stuff. But what am I missing? I'm going to have to consult my notes because I don't have time just to work through it. That's interesting because yeah. Sure, code. Yeah, absolutely. It's clearly something really silly that I'm missing. I'm injecting the path variable, right? And that's good. Yeah, I got the metar token. Yep. Oh yes, I love public APIs. Okay, hold on. This is not the ICAO. They specify this as raw. That's what I was telling you. Earlier, my laziness caught up with me in this case because I'm using a public API and I didn't go through and map anything. I just kind of kept it simple. And sometimes simple is not simple when they do weird things. Yeah, well, you know, it's when you're using, and it's great public data. I mean, this is a super useful site, but they make some really odd decisions when it comes to API building. Now, there we go. Well, look at that. So we have the raw value here, and this is what I was talking about, the cryptic link here. So we've got KSTL, which is the ICAO code for St. Louis Lambert International. Here's the time in Zulu, so Universal Coordinated Time. It's the 14th at 1751 Zulu. You have winds out of 260, so roughly west-southwest, at 22 knots, gusting to 30 knots. It's like gusting to 28 miles an hour. That's a lot, folks, if you're trying to land an airplane. Light rain, it's got 10 statute miles of visibility. Light rain, clear skies as far as the ceilings, right? And so on and so forth. So there's a lot of information here. The flight rules are VFR, so it's visual flight rules. You can see the airport as you're coming into land. That's generally a good thing, right? So I'm going to now go and do an airport / KATL, and we'll see what, oh, not airport. That's on me. METAR. That's all me, that's not them. Okay, so we have winds, 8 gusting to 19 knots. That's not quite as bad, but it's still pretty aggressive, so I hope nobody has a flight out in the next hour or two. It usually calms down as the day goes on, so if it's later, that's fine, we're good. All right, so we've got everything we need there. Let's go ahead and create a condition service that uses it too, because this is where you start to see some really cool stuff in terms of your service registry and your properties, your config server, and it all ties together, I think, brilliantly. So I'm going to leave Lombok in there even though I don't think I'm going to use it. Everything else is the same. So I'm going to generate that, I didn't change the name, but you know what I mean, the description, it's fine. So let's go here. We'll go back to condition service. We'll unzip that. And yes, we have 10 minutes. So I can do this in 5. And we'll do a really quick summary, and I'll give away the good stuff, and we'll talk about, again, how the platform takes a lot of this extra work off your plate and allows you to be even more productive than you're already seeing. In a few minutes, we've got this kind of whole stable of services, which I think is amazing, but then we can make it even better by enlisting the platform's help on our behalf. So we define the Spring application name here. In this case, this is conditions service, type service, and then in this case, we want our Spring config, import, config server. Once again, we're pointing to http://localhost 8888. And then let's go to our application. A little different. And then, of course, we want to define some domain, right? Our domains. And oh yes, I'm not going to use Lombok. I'm going to mix it up here a little bit. So I'm going to make this a record. And this will be our airport record. And I'm going to use a string ICAO. And that should be good enough. And then, of course, in this case, I want to JSON ignore properties, to ignore. All right, that should be good. And then we want, here, we want a record called time. And once again, we have a zone date time. And we call this DT. And our string for representation, can't talk. And then here, once again, we have our metar, right? And our metar has a, hold on, raw, get that right. And then our time, called time, and then a string, once again, which in this case is our flight rules. SQL, come on. Class, oh no. Interesting. No, it actually should be the time. There we go. I just was missing it. It's so nice. Okay, so let's get to work here. I do need to, before I start this off, what I want to do is create a bean, and I want to make this a load balanced bean, because that involves the load balancer, which is automatically configured. Again, on your behalf, you can tweak it, but in most cases you don't have to. I want to create a web client builder here that I can use. It's load balanced. And then I'm going to just call this builder and return web client builder. And then I'm going to use that in my REST controller that I'm defining here. We'll call this our conditions controller. And involved. Okay. All right. So I'm going to inject our web client builder. Call this again builder. And then I'm going to just add this to the constructor so we inject it. Again, I'm leaving Lombok out of this one entirely for now. Well, why not? Just forever, right? And then I'm going to define a web client. I'm going to use the web client builder that I injected, the load balanced builder bean, to create an airport client. And then I'm going to also create a weather client. So that way I can have two reactive web clients to deal with two different APIs, two different endpoints, or in this case, two different services that I'm going to use to consume. And then I'm going to define this AP client with web client. Well, actually, I'll just use my builder and inject it, right? And I'm going to point to a base URL. And this is where the magic, I think, comes in. This is fun. Because remember, we have a service registry that provides our discovery service. So we are going to point this to http://airport service. Right? That's pretty nice, because the service registry will tell us where to find an instance, a live instance of that airport service. In this case, we're going to create caps lock, weather service, and we'll make this our text client. And then let's get busy here. So I'm going to define a mapping here. We'll just call it straight off the root, and we'll return our conditions. We'll return a flux of metars, in this case. There we go. Get conditions at airports. And we'll do a client.get, actually, we want our airport client, right? And we'll get all of our airports, the B, C, and D airports in the area, the vicinity of St. Louis. We'll retrieve those, and then we will map that body to a flux, in this case, of airports, right? And this is a type airport. And then I'm going to flat map those. I'm going to take each airport and use the weather client to get, and I'm going to pass that in, right? So this will be, let's see, so for the weather client, I want to do slash utar, right? Slash ID, KO, it doesn't matter, we can call it whatever we want. And we use our airport dot ICAO, and then we will retrieve that, and we'll convert that body to a mono, because in this case we have one weather report for each airport, and then I'm just going to log it at the end, just so we can kind of see what's going on. So let's go ahead and run that. No, it's not that. Oh, yes, because I need to actually build that. I have the builder, now I need to build that client. Let's run it, then we'll get to the fun stuff at the end. All right, so everything looks good. Let's find out if we got it in Eureka. And yes, we do. So let's go to our conditions service here. And let's just see if we're retrieving this. So what it should go out and do is go out and pull all the list of airports from our airport service and then turn around and get the active or the current weather situation from the weather service that we have defined and provide that to us in a list form. So it's exactly what it does. Yep, these things never go wrong in live demos. All right, so this gives us a little bit of a peek, right? We have our configuration service serving up properties to all of our portfolio of microservices. We have our service registry, our discovery service, which allows these services to find each other and talk to each other. Even if one dies here and another is spun up in its place over here, they find each other, they locate each other, and they can leverage each other dynamically, which is awesome. We have a couple of backend services, our airport service, our weather service. We have a condition service, which is using both of those, and it's all tied together really nicely. That's all local. Now, what if we want to take this to production, right? Oh, my session expired. Let me refresh here. All right, so I'm going to go to my portal, and I mentioned that Microsoft and VMware work together, and before VMware, Pivotal to create Azure Spring Cloud. It's an oversimplified saying, but it basically is the paths for Spring Boot and Spring Cloud applications. It makes your life as a developer easier to deploy vast portfolios of microservices and have them just work, which is awesome. It's based on Kubernetes, built around Kubernetes, so you can get to everything all the way up and down the stack, but in many cases you don't have to. It just works. That's the promise for us developers. We generally want things to just work. But if they don't work, we want to be able to get in and turn dials, right? You can do that, but just like Spring, it's opinionated. So in most cases, it does the hard work and the heavy lifting for you, which is brilliant. So I'm going to give you a very quick tour. If you go under Spring, this is just the service. Everything's deployed with a bit more information, with a bit more capabilities than I showed you. The config server, we just point, same as I did before. I'm just going to zoom in here. I'm using the same exact set of configuration files for my config server. And then if I go to the apps, we see that I have the same exact applications, plus a couple of more, right? I've got a gateway which controls access to everything, and it funnels through to everything. There's really no time, I was going to walk you through that, but to give you some kind of an idea of some of the really cool stuff, you go into Application Insights, because these are things you don't want to have to code yourself. If you go to Application Insights, you can see the dashboard, you can see the application map, which is kind of nice. I have some old stuff in here that I kind of was playing around and breaking stuff earlier. So you do see a red line. That's not my code. I'm kidding, it is my code, but it is playing with stuff. So, but it shows how the various different services interact with each other, and then you can troubleshoot based on how they interact and expected times between. Because again, you also have distributed tracing baked into the application platform. You have logging baked into the application platform. So it gives you a lot of power. That the power you saw earlier, multiply it. And as a developer, it's just kind of like a playground, but industrial strength on steroids. So with that, I want to stop here. I want to go back to the slides just so I don't forget this. Many times I do. So let's see. So here's some helpful resources. Everything you saw and more is out at the repo on the top. And that's just Spring Cloud in the cloud. If you want to reach me, if you think of something, well, out in the hallway, that's fine, ping me. If you think of something 20 minutes later, again, I do that all the time myself. Email me if you must. Tweet me if you can. My DMs are open, so even if you just add me on Twitter, you can immediately send me a direct message and I'll get it. But I live on Twitter. I just occasionally check email. So really, if you want to reach me, Twitter is the way to do it. So I would encourage you to do that. Thanks for coming. And before I let you go, I do want to just maybe do a couple of giveaways because I'm really excited to do that. One is my book. So if you are not as familiar with Spring Boot, or maybe you are, but was with Java and you want to play with it with Kotlin or vice versa, or want to explore other topics, hopefully it's in here, give you a little bit of a taste, as well as maybe exploring a couple of fun topics that I like. So do you have my book already? Yes, you, the one who caught my double semicolons. Well, I would like you to have this, if you would, if you'd like. All right, I come up afterward and you can get it. And then let's see, gosh, this is tough. I have to say that you were the other person who actually spoke up, which, and I appreciate everybody not firing questions during, because again, time, but I have to hand this off to you because you caught something as well. So this is for you. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, I think we're at the end of our rope, and I don't want to encroach on Mark's time next, but please, let's meet out in the hallway. I'm here the rest of the day. And again, if you think of something later, ping me online. But thanks so much for coming. Great to be back at Devnexus. I'm happy to see you all here, every one of you. And if you want to come up and shake, fist bump, hug, it's all good. So thanks.